In her civil lawsuit, Cassie said that she was the victim of abuse, assault, and at the hands of Diddy.
Today, in a New York federal courtroom, Sean Diddy Combs told the judge he was, quote, a little nervous. The rap mogul's criminal trial began this morning. He is trafficking, racketeering, and more.
The courtroom sat in a heavy silence, the kind of atmosphere that only comes from the weight of shocking revelations. Sean Diddy Combs, once untouchable in his empire of music, fashion, and influence, now sat at the defense table, his expression caught somewhere between defiance and unease. Across the room, the prosecution's star witness, prepared to deliver what could be the most damning testimony yet. It wasn't a former girlfriend or an industry rival, but someone from Diddy's own inner circle, a former bodyguard who had stood by his side for years, privy to the darkest corners of his glittering world. And now, that loyalty was shattered, replaced by a cold willingness to spill it all in exchange for his own freedom.
The defense wanted to propose a question on, after the potential jurors filled out their questionnaire, have they seen any news media, any documentaries, anything just relating to a news medium, and whether or not they saw it in between them filling out the questionnaire to Monday morning when they saw, or when they go to jury selection.
The bodyguard, a towering figure with a demeanor hardened by years of safeguarding secrets, took the stand. His voice was steady, but the weight of his words sent ripples through the courtroom. He described years spent as more than just security. He was part of the machinery that kept Diddy's operations running smoothly, no matter how questionable the tasks. His job wasn't just to shield Diddy from physical threats. It was to shield him from the consequences of his actions. And now, with his own legal troubles mounting, he had decided to flip the script. According to his testimony, the glitz and glamour of Diddy's public persona were only a polished facade, masking a reality steeped in manipulation and control. The bodyguard recounted how he was instructed to handle situations that went far beyond the scope of typical security work, whether it was managing the aftermath of explosive disputes or ensuring certain individuals remained cooperative by any means necessary. His role extended into murky territory that blurred the lines between protector and enforcer. It was a job that demanded unwavering loyalty, but it came with a growing sense of unease. And now, that unease was being laid bare for all to see. The courtroom was riveted as the bodyguard painted a vivid picture of Diddy's world behind closed doors. He spoke of events that sounded like something out of a crime thriller. Private gatherings where everything seemed meticulously orchestrated, yet chaos always lurked on the edges. Invitations were exclusive, the guest list tightly controlled, but what unfolded inside was anything but ordinary. The bodyguard described being tasked with ensuring that no one left with evidence that could come back to haunt his employer. Phones were confiscated and security was doubled, but even with all the precautions, whispers still managed to escape.
This investigation is ongoing, and I encourage anyone with information about this case to come forward and to do it quickly.
And then there was the matter of the infamous tapes. According to the bodyguard, during a high-profile raid on one of Diddy's residences, authorities uncovered a collection of recordings that allegedly showed moments from these private gatherings. While Diddy's legal team argued that these recordings depicted consensual encounters, the prosecution claimed they were something far more sinister. The bodyguard didn't hold back, recounting how he was once ordered to dispose of certain tapes when tensions within Diddy's circle began to rise. He didn't know what was on them, he claimed, but the urgency of the request left little doubt that they contained material that could be damaging if exposed.
Not do this alone. Do you foresee that there could be other charges related to this case?
I'm not taking anything off the table.
No one wants to be mentioned.
As the testimony continued, the bodyguard revealed the lengths to which Diddy would go to maintain control over those around him. He described a man who was as charismatic as he was intimidating, someone who could charm a room one moment and leave it trembling the next. It wasn't just about power. It was about ensuring that everyone knew who held it. The bodyguard admitted that even he wasn't immune to Diddy's tactics, citing instances where he felt pressured to toe the line even when it went against his own moral compass. "You don't say no to him," he said, his voice tinged with a mix of resentment and regret. "Not if you want to keep your job and your peace of mind." The prosecution seized on this testimony, using it to bolster their argument that Diddy operated not just as an entertainer, but as the head of a well-oiled machine designed to protect his interests at any cost. They painted a picture of a man who thrived on control, whose influence extended far beyond the recording studio and into every facet of the lives of those around him. The bodyguard's words were a direct challenge to the defense's claims that Diddy's actions were merely the eccentricities of a wealthy and powerful man. Instead, they suggested a calculated pattern of behavior that left little room for ambiguity.
Which, again, the judge kind of made this a point, too, talking about, okay, well, if we're going to continue to do sidebars each and every single time that a prospective juror has to talk about a sensitive topic, that could take up a lot of time. But again, the defense and the government both seem pretty confident that they'll still be able to kind of get it going at a quick pace. This isn't unusual to do in these types of high-profile cases. So that was pretty much just the topics about, Ghislaine Maxwell.
But the defense wasn't about to let this testimony go unchallenged. Diddy's attorneys came out swinging, questioning the bodyguard's motives and credibility. They pointed out that he was testifying under the shadow of his own legal troubles, implying that his story was less about seeking justice and more about cutting a deal. "Isn't it true," one of Diddy's lawyers asked, "that you only decided to come forward after you were facing charges of your own?" The bodyguard didn't flinch. "I'm here because the truth needs to come out," he replied. "Whatever happens to me, I can live with that. But I can't keep living with what I know." The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the bodyguard's testimony wrapped up. His words had left a mark, but the trial was far from over. The prosecution still had more witnesses to call, and the defense was gearing up for a battle that promised to be as ruthless as it was unpredictable. And then there was the question of Victim 3, the missing witness whose absence loomed over the proceedings like a ghost. The prosecution had pinned much of their case on her testimony, but with her whereabouts unknown, a critical piece of the puzzle remained frustratingly out of reach.
I want to mention one other quick thing. They can't find witness number 3 still. This is apparently an ex-girlfriend of Diddy's who was one of the alleged victims. And prosecution can't find her.
Right, I heard.
As the day's session adjourned, the sense of unease lingered. The bodyguard's revelations had opened a door into a world few could have imagined, but it was clear that the story was far from complete. There were still layers to peel back, truths to uncover, and questions that demanded answers. And with every passing moment, the stakes only seemed to grow higher.
Attorney is trying to find her, and her attorney has said that she may not be willing to come and testify anyway, so
be interesting.
And just when you thought it couldn't get messier, the absence of Victim 3 began to suffocate the room like a shadow no one could shake. The prosecution's star witness was missing in action, and it wasn't just a logistical nightmare, it was a gaping hole in their case. Victim 3, she wasn't some minor player in the narrative, she was supposed to be the linchpin, the one who could tie together the threads of control, coercion, and exploitation that the prosecution had painstakingly unraveled. Her testimony was described as explosive, the kind that could obliterate any attempt by the defense to dress up Diddy's actions as consensual or misunderstood. But with her nowhere to be found, the prosecution was left scrambling, and the courtroom could feel the tension rising. Speculation was rampant. Had she gone into hiding, been intimidated into silence, or was it something even more sinister? The prosecution, for all their efforts, seemed to be hitting a wall. They claimed they couldn't reach her or her attorney, and let's be honest, when even the legal representation is MIA, it raises eyebrows. Whispers swirled about whether this was a case of cold feet or something far more calculated. After all, this trial wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was a high-stakes spectacle with reputations, careers, and fortunes hanging in the balance. The kind of spectacle where people with power and influence might go to extraordinary lengths to control the narrative.
Because we now know who all the prosecutors will be on Diddy's trial. They're all women. They have assembled a team of female prosecutors, and that is definitely not by accident.
The defense, of course, wasted no time seizing on the situation. Diddy's attorneys practically salivated at the idea of a trial without this key witness. They argued that her absence cast doubt on the prosecution's entire case, painting it as flimsy and reliant on hearsay. If their star witness can't even show up, they argued, what does that say about the credibility of their claims? It was a calculated move, one that aimed to chip away at the jury's confidence in the prosecution's narrative. But here's the thing. Her absence didn't just weaken the prosecution's case, it added a whole new layer of intrigue and suspicion. What kind of pressure must she have been under to make her disappear like this? And who stood to gain the most from her silence? Meanwhile, the trial itself was becoming a magnet for celebrity drama. Names that had once been whispered in private were now being dragged into the spotlight, and the courtroom buzzed with the implications. A-listers, collaborators, and even former friends of Diddy found themselves caught in the web of allegations, their ties to the mogul scrutinized under a microscope. Some distanced themselves with carefully worded public statements, while others maintained a conspicuous silence that only fueled the rumors. And then there were those who were rumored to have been part of the alleged misconduct, either as participants or enablers. The entertainment industry's glittering facade was starting to crack, revealing an underbelly that no one wanted to acknowledge, but everyone was desperate to dissect.
You know, I suppose it could be coincidence. I don't think it's coincidence, and especially given the nature of the case.
Yes.
Because when you look at who is examining these various witnesses, you know, especially female alleged victims, of which there will be 4.
Take, for example, the whispers about Diddy's infamous parties. These weren't just industry networking events, they were something else entirely. Rumors described them as elaborate, over-the-top affairs where anything and everything was on the table. And yet, court filings painted an even more disturbing picture of what went on behind closed doors. One lawsuit spilled details about an alleged incident where a former employee claimed they were pressured to procure attendees for one of these infamous gatherings. According to the suit, their role wasn't just limited to logistics. It extended to ensuring that every guest was cooperative with the night's unspoken rules. The employee alleged that refusal to comply with these demands led to threats of retaliation, including being blacklisted from the industry. This wasn't just a party, the lawsuit claimed. It was a carefully curated performance where everyone had a role to play, whether they wanted to or not. In another damning account, a woman who filed a lawsuit under the pseudonym Jane Doe described a harrowing experience that allegedly took place at one of Diddy's private estates. The suit claimed she was invited under the guise of a professional opportunity, only to find herself in a situation she couldn't escape. The details were chilling, not just because of what allegedly happened, but because of how meticulously everything seemed to have been orchestrated. She claimed that security teams prevented anyone from leaving until the event was over, and that every step was monitored to ensure total secrecy. Her lawsuit also alleged that the aftermath was handled with equal precision, with threats and non-disclosure agreements quickly shutting down any chance of public exposure.
Or not really the judge, the government didn't go into too many details about the extent of the plea offer, but one thing that they had said was pretty much that under the plea offer, he would be facing less time than he's facing if he would have gone to trial. So when the allocution portion came, Diddy stood up, the judge kind of read him everything that he had needed to read to him, just about whether or not he was of sound mind, whether or not...
Attendees were said to include not just celebrities, but also people who operated in the shadows, fixers, handlers, and facilitators whose job it was to ensure that the night went smoothly, no matter what that entailed. And while the defense argued that these gatherings were nothing more than consensual fun among adults, the prosecution painted a far darker picture. They alleged that these events were meticulously planned with roles assigned and lines drawn that no one dared to cross. Except, of course, the man at the center of it all. Adding fuel to the fire, another lawsuit accused Diddy of using his vast network of employees to control nearly every aspect of his personal and professional life. Former staffers alleged that they were often tasked with keeping problematic individuals in line, whether that meant smoothing over disputes, erasing evidence, or managing public relations disasters before they could spiral. One particularly damning claim came from a former assistant who said they were ordered to pay off individuals who had threatened to go public with damaging information. The assistant's lawsuit included detailed records of payments allegedly made to keep people quiet, and even referenced messages that implied Diddy was personally involved in approving these transactions.
As far as the plea offer that came up in the last hearing where the government said we did offer him a deal, or an offer, I should say, and that he rejected it. And now it's official, and he said it to the court as well, too. You know, he stood up, he said that he consulted with this about his attorneys, and it seems like they're planning, or not even seems like they are, they're rolling the dice by going to...
And then there was the lawsuit filed by a former videographer who claimed to have seen more than he ever signed up for during his time documenting Diddy's events. In his filing, he alleged that he was explicitly told to destroy certain recordings that captured moments not meant to be seen by anyone outside the circle. The videographer claimed that when he hesitated, he was swiftly removed from his position and warned that speaking out would come at a cost. His lawsuit argued that this was part of a larger pattern of behavior, where employees were not just hired to work, they were hired to protect a lifestyle that operated on its own set of rules, far from the public eye.
Jesse, we've been talking about this, just how confident the defense appears that, they could get off on these charges. They could be acquitted, or possibly, who knows what could happen, just because, again, you are rolling the dice. This really does feel like just kind of like, just kind of like a gambling a little bit with Diddy's life in a sense, just because, if you're offered maybe X amount of time versus this huge amount of time, which could be.
As the trial continued, it became clear that this wasn't just about Diddy. It was about an entire ecosystem that had allowed him to thrive unchecked for decades. Questions began to surface about who might have turned a blind eye, who might have benefited from his rise, and who might now be complicit in keeping the truth buried. The entertainment industry, long adept at protecting its own, now found itself in the uncomfortable position of having to answer for its silence. And Diddy? He was no longer just a defendant. He was a symbol of everything that could go wrong when power and accountability are out of balance.
Bars, you would think possibly, it's the federal government building a case against you. Maybe you would go for the lesser offer, but again, that would be having to admit that he had did something wrong. And the defense has always maintained that he is innocent. He has done nothing wrong, that this is just, these are just ex-girlfriends that are mad at, like just all these types of things that the defense is.
But even as the walls seemed to close in, Diddy's team doubled down. They painted him as a victim of a vendetta, a target of overzealous prosecutors looking to make a name for themselves. They pointed to his philanthropy, his contributions to music and culture, and his public persona as evidence of his good character. And yet, every time they tried to humanize him, another revelation would surface, dragging the narrative back into the mud. It was a game of legal whack-a-mole, with the defense swinging wildly to control the damage, while the prosecution kept raising the stakes.
And the judge said that, he seemed to be taking this kind of matter seriously. Now, I will just kind of preface it and say it. I haven't seen the documentary, but it's not out of the realm, or it's not out of the norm that she even went on this documentary as well, too, because she had previously gone on another documentary and kind of talked about her client's accusations against Diddy as well, too. So I was surprised that they brought up this particular documentary. Again, I don't know the extent of what she had said, but the defense seemed very annoyed in a way.
And what about the jury? They sat through it all, their faces inscrutable as they weighed the testimonies, the evidence, and the endless parade of experts and witnesses. They had been carefully selected to be impartial, but let's be real. How do you stay neutral when you're hearing about events that sound like something out of a pulpy The prosecution's strategy hinged on making the jury see Diddy not as the charismatic mogul he appeared to be, but as a man whose charm was nothing more than a mask for manipulation. The defense, on the other hand, needed the jury to believe that the allegations were exaggerated, if not outright fabricated. It was a battle for perception, with both sides pulling out all the stops.
And so the judge, again, seemed to be taking that matter pretty seriously and just pretty much said that, everyone, the attorneys, the witnesses' attorneys, the accusers' attorneys, they all have to adhere to these professional rules. They all have to adhere to this professional conduct. And if this continues and if more things are said that get onto the judge's radar.
But here's the kicker. Even as the trial unfolded, the story was far from over. The missing witness was still out there, her silence a deafening reminder that the full truth had yet to be revealed. The celebrities who had been dragged into the narrative were scrambling to protect their own images, knowing that their fates were now tied to the outcome of this case. And Diddy himself? He sat in the eye of the storm, his carefully curated empire teetering on the brink of collapse. So, what do you think? Was victim 3 silenced? Or did she choose to vanish for her own reasons? And how deep does this rabbit hole really go? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep unraveling this tangled web together. Stay tuned. This story is only getting started.